Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and do some more slug testing, and today we've got a very interesting combination to try out and I've got some really good hopes for it as well. This is a pretty new setup to the channel. We recently tested it for the first time and it already has shown us some very nice looking results, but these slugs we've got have also performed well through a different shotgun a good while back on the channel. So in theory, we should continue to see some really nice results if everything works out together the way that I think it should anyway. But first up, for the shotgun that we've got today, I brought out the Savage 212. This is a bolt-action 12-gauge shotgun that's box-fed with a 22-inch fully rifled barrel on it. It's essentially a bolt-action rifle just chambered for shotgun shells. It has the AccuTrigger in it, which is set up very nicely as well. And I've got a Vortex Crossfire HD 3-9x40 with the illuminated 2A BDC reticle in it for those curious about that as well. It's a very nice shotgun setup for sure. It's heavy and it does put all the recoil right back into your shoulder because there's no give since it's a bolt action. But from our testing so far and from what I've heard from plenty of other people, these things shoot really well. So I'm thinking we definitely should see some more very nice looking results today. But as for the slugs we're running today, I brought out some of these. The good old Brenneke Red Magic Sabot slugs. These ones are the 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 1 ounce Red Magic Sabot slugs. And the back of the box says 1584 for our muzzle velocity. It does also say up here 432 grains / 1 ounce projectile. 1 ounce is actually 437.5, so they're a little bit underweight there if that number is actually accurate or not. But they also claim a 5-shot 3-inch group at 100 yards. And based on our previous testing with these in 3-inch, probably 2 years ago or so now, through my rifled 870, I think our 3-shot group at 100 was pretty much right on 3 inches. So at least from an 870 platform, we know that the Red Magics are usually some pretty solid performers, and hopefully the 212 can make them even better, because there's definitely the potential for it to happen for sure. But here's what one of those shells looks like really quick for those curious. You can see that Brenneke slug down in there. A little bit of a hollow point type cavity on this one compared to the rounded nose on others, but other than that, pretty standard Brenneke equipment here, nothing over the top fancy. But as for today's test, we're running it the same as we usually do with slug tests. We're going to shoot 2 groups, one at 50 yards and another at 100 yards, all of them through the chronograph as well. May not be everybody's perfect test, but I don't have an unlimited amount of these slugs to work with. And 50 yards, I think, is pretty average practical hunting distance for a shotgun. And 100 yards is probably getting up there to the longer end of the shots you would take. We may adjust those distances if we continue to see nice results from this 212, but for now, we're rolling with the standard 50 and 100 yards. So let's get you guys a view of those targets. The barrel will have time to cool down between each of our groups, so heat should not be a factor either. So let's start shooting some groups and seeing what we can get from the 2 3/4 inch Brenneke Red Magic slugs through this 212. Alright, so let's look at our chrono numbers real quick before we go look at our target. Boss claim is 1584. We have a 22-inch barrel, so I would have imagined that we should have seen pretty close to that claim. There aren't a ton of slug barrels out there that are much longer than 24 inches or so. Maybe that's what they tested it through, but we definitely were a little bit below their boss claim. We had a high of 1482, a low of 1445. That gave us an average of 1458, so that's 125, 130 feet per second below their boss claim. I definitely would have liked to see a little bit more, but that is still plenty good enough for an average deer hunt scenario. But our extreme spread was 37, and our standard deviation was 13, so at least they were pretty consistent with their velocities. But at the average of 1458, here's your muzzle energies based on the 432 grains bullets that they claim. It's a 1 ounce projectile, so they say, which would actually weigh 437.5. But going off of the 432 that they say on the box, that is your muzzle energy. Obviously, that's going to be plenty enough to do the job. But if we were seeing closer to their box claimed velocity, we would definitely have a little more to go with there. But let's head over here to our target and measure some things, because I think we saw some pretty interesting looking results over there. All right, so here's our target, and we definitely kind of saw the tale of two different stories here. We'll start over there on the left with our 50-yard group, that being this just big oblong hole here. That is actually 3 shots. You can kind of only see 2 of them, but we put the third one right in between the 2 of them and punched the center out there as well. So 3 of them just creating one big hole at 50 yards. That's very nice. That's exactly what I was hoping to see, and you can't argue with that one bit. And yes, those results were with the wind blowing the target back and forth just a little bit, which is something that I didn't even notice while I was shooting it per se. Since the target was moving directly back in my direction, you couldn't even really tell. And who knows, if the target wasn't moving a little bit, we could have maybe even seen a touch better than that even. So considering we're stacking them like that, that's very nice. To the best of my measurements, we get 0.79 from center to center on the farthest 2 bullet holes across. Little tricky to measure when it's just one big oblong hole, but roughly 3/4 of an inch or so at 50 yards. You're stacking them on top of each other, so nothing to complain about there whatsoever. So moving out to 100, I was hoping that trend would continue. I expected our groups to open up a little bit out there at longer ranges. That's not at all unusual, but with that tight of a group at 50, I was hoping to see somewhere between 1 and 2 inches. 1.5 inches or so was kind of the target goal, and that is not at all what happened. We hit these 3 shots right here, and they're pretty evenly spaced regardless of which way you measure here, but it's not at all the same story as what we saw at 50. Now, all of these shells came from the same 2 boxes. They were bought from the same place at the same time and have the same lot number. We didn't see any kind of variations in velocity. They were very consistent. So somewhere between 50 and 100 yards, likely around 75 to 80 yards, we definitely opened our group up pretty quickly. Most likely, that's probably when they started going subsonic, is somewhere in that range. And we've seen this with a number of slugs in our testing, where we'll get a really nice group at 50 and then not mathematically equal out to what you would think it should out towards 100. This is why we may or may not play with the ranges we shoot at with this particular 212 especially. Maybe 75 and 100 might be a little bit more ideal for that setup, but big difference there. I'm saying 50, 60 yards is probably the realistic range for these slugs in that setup. Because at 100 yards, that's 4.56. And the farthest 2 points across are that left one down to this bottom one right here. The box claim is a 3-inch 5-shot group at 100. And that is not what we saw here. From the 3-inch version of this shell through my Remington 870 with a rifle barrel, we were seeing very close to that 3-inch claim. So maybe if we run some more of the 3-inch version through this 212, we might see that same result or a little better. But maybe these 2 3/4 shells just aren't quite as good as what the 3-inch versions of them are. I don't know, but big difference there. Is it technically still minute of deer? If my scope was zeroed to that round, yeah, it would technically do the job. I mean, here's my handprint for a size reference. My handprint pretty much just covers up everything. So it is good enough to do the job if you put it through the lungs on a deer, but I prefer to see 3 inches or better out of a slug gun. Not nearly as good as what we saw with some Winchester copper impacts out of that 212 here recently either. Those were right at 2 inches at 100. So big difference for sure. We still obviously have very good potential here. We've seen better results from that 212. So it's just a case of doing more testing with it and finding what slugs really perform well with it. So not the worst result I've ever seen for slug gun here today, but especially after seeing that 50-yard group, I was hoping for a little better out there at 100. And here are a couple of the Sabots out of those slugs. Nothing really too fancy overall. Typical Brenneke style stuff. No major damage or anything to them. We had good rifling engagement. All of them look pretty consistently even across the board. Nothing I'm really too concerned about. And they did their job the way they were supposed to. Those slugs were flying nice and stable. But I really just think somewhere beyond 50 yards, whether it be 60, 70, maybe 80, somewhere in that range, that transition from super to subsonic really started to open our groups up some with these. But the Sabots, on the other hand, look perfectly fine overall. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about those results right there? At 50 yards, you're stacking them on top of each other. Clearly, 50 to 60 yard range, you're going to be more than good enough. And for most people that want to use or have to use a slug gun, 50, 60 yards, that's pretty typical. So for that scenario, most of your average big woods or thicker cover areas, 50-ish yard shots, that is going to be plenty good enough. That's going to be more than capable. Out to 100, going to a 4.5-inch group, it's not horrible necessarily, but it's nowhere near what I would like to see, that's for sure. There are plenty of pie plate accuracy slug guns out there at 100 yards that have taken more deer than you could imagine. But the previous test we did with this 212 with some Winchester copper impacts, if we're getting 2 inches with those shells, there's no reason why we can't continue to get 2-inch or better groups out of it at 100 yards. So clearly, just not quite the best performer once you get out to that little bit longer range. And I'm sure people are going to say, why would you ever use a slug gun past 50 or 60 yards anyway? And for those people, sure, you can go ahead and comment that. But there's an awful lot of people out there that have to or want to hunt with slug guns, and they sit on the edge of a field, and if a deer pops out at 100 yards, they're going to take that shot. So we know the gun is capable of better. We just got to continue testing with some other slugs and really dial in what this combo likes the best. But leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected to see? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested a 212 or a 220? And if so, what kind of results have you seen with different slugs, and what does yours tend to like? Is that kind of accuracy good enough for you to take it out on a hunt? Would you keep it a little closer range, or is 4.5 inches good enough out towards 100 yards? And what other slugs do you want to see me run through it that you think might be good performers? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.